This episode is brought to you by Audible. Listen to the new Audible original Sacrilege, Curse of the Mbirwi, starring Caleb McLaughlin from Stranger Things.
When an African American family takes a luxury safari to Zimbabwe to find their roots, they awaken something that should have stayed buried.
After desecrating sacred ground, they unleash the Mbirwi, an ancient evil that feeds on weakness and pain.
McLaughlin delivers a powerful performance as Deshaun, haunted by his twin brother's death. Created by Nyasha Hatendi, Sacrilege explores generational trauma and the consequences of disrespecting traditions that aren't yours to claim.
What happens when the spirits of a land you've forgotten decide they haven't forgotten you?
Go to audible.com/sacrilege and experience it in Dolby Atmos audio now.
It always comes down to telling the truth. We live in an age of lies at the moment. Never more so have we been in an age of lies, and we all know it.
That was Nyasha Hatendi, the writer, director, and producer of Sacrilege, Curse of the Mbirwi. In our last episode, we took a deep dive into Audible's latest horror audio drama. This week, we're thrilled to welcome Nyasha Hatendi himself as our special guest. We dive into Nyasha's incredible journey into audio storytelling, exploring Black identity, cultural duality, and the undeniable power of truth.
Welcome to another episode of the Brown and Black Podcast. My name is Jack Rico.
And I'm Mike Sargent.
And every week we take a look at race and pop culture through a brown and black lens.
Nyasha, welcome to Brown and Black.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to be here.
All right. Looking at your background, you've done a lot of radio drama for the BBC. I can liken UK's view of radio drama and what happened in America sort of like Japan in animation, where there's a lot of adult storytelling, and they were way ahead of us on that. But now it's changed. Now audio dramas have become a thing. And I just want to know about you deciding that you want to be a storyteller in audio drama, having been in so many, and whether you feel like you're meeting the moment.
That's got a lot of thoughts, I guess. First of all, I think audio drama has always been a thing. It's funny, when I was preparing for this, I went back and looked at the old Hollywood recordings of radio drama and just how they were able to do so much with so little. And that brought me back to when I was writing this. I really just, I'm not per se a writer. This is pretty much my debut as a writer. So obviously I've written in the past and had little things that have been bubbling around, but nothing as serious as this. And when I wanted to do film and TV, but realized I couldn't get into the industry that way as a sort of a novice writer. And so it made sense. I'd listened to QCode. I come across QCode randomly and was really fascinated by what they were doing, because they were taking the narrative podcast and making it into something cinematic, which from my time on the BBC radio was always something that I wanted them to do. They were not quite doing that, but it was more theatrical. That was the vibe then. But I had always wanted to know what it would feel like to go in that direction, to go more cinematic, because I did see the potential of that while I was doing these plays. I was part of the radio drama company. So when you finish drama school in the UK, you go out and you get your first job. Some people will get big old movies and such and go on to stardom, but for the majority of drama students that come out of drama school, they have to get going straight away. And the radio drama company was basically a company where you get a weekly salary and they call you in throughout the week. You go in, play little parts here, big parts there. You act alongside some of the greatest actors that there are and some sort of up and comers. You get the whole range and you do all these different sort of genres, etc. It was like the most immersive apprenticeship one could have in drama. And because you're stripping away the sort of the cameras and the theater, you're really just focusing on the acting and using the voice And I understood the potential of that and worked with a couple of directors that I really appreciated. I had a couple of moments which were interesting. I think I was like the only Black actor in the radio drama company at the time.
I was going to ask.
So there were a couple of times where I would ask, does this character have to be, can he not be Black? Can he not? And they were, no, he's not, he's this. And so you come across various barriers wherever you're going. But the key thing was that it was one of those apprenticeships where you learn what makes a story work and what makes performance work and how your audience are going to react and feel. And I think when I took that understanding and that learning and some of the lessons from some of the directors I worked with and some of the actors I worked with, and when I heard the QCode, Cynthia Erivo did a QCode podcast, which I recommend, called Carrier.
Okay, Miss Watts. Everything seems to be in order here, except your vehicle registration.
How's that now?
Who is Earl Watts again?
Yeah, I told you, that's my father.
Okay, so why are you driving his rig?
I'm just covering for him. It's temporary. Look, I didn't do anything illegal, right?
We'll find out.
Okay, because I really need to get this trailer delivered on time.
Sit tight, or this can take a heck of a lot longer.
And Cynthia and I were at drama school together. So when I saw her doing that, I was like, oh, you know what? I'm gonna check that out. Went in, looked at it, and it was great. It's about there's an alien monster in the back of a truck, and she's a trucker, and she's driving through. So it's like one location. It's all on radios, and they're all like calling across each other. It's really intense, really sad, but really good. And I was like, yeah, I think I can do something in that world. I think I know what to do in this world in this way. So I was lucky enough when I approached QCode with this idea for them to see the potential in it as well. And I knew going into it that I could push this further than perhaps they had gone before. And I was excited to kind of know how I could do that or learn how I could do that.
What possessed you to want to do this kind of story and work specifically in this genre? Jack and I have talked on other shows about the potential of storytelling in genre. And so I'm just curious, what made you decide this is the story I'm going to tell?
First of all, I wanted to tell something in Africa. I wanted to put the African Zimbabwe in particular front and center. I wanted to tell something from that world. I wanted to share my experience of that world with the world. I didn't really set out to write horror, though. I wanted to write something that was provocative. I wanted to write something that there was a director once told we were preparing for a play and said what we wanted the audience to come in feeling one way and to leave feeling completely different, to have change throughout the process. So I really wanted to write something that would allow an audience to experience that growth and that change. And I guess when you get into, and I also wanted to write something personal. When you write something for the first time, keep it to something to write about what you know, effectively. So I had to express different parts of myself through this story and was compelled to go as far as I could go into each of those different aspects of myself, those different sort of qualms or fears or insecurities. It was really about understanding not only myself, but understanding my relationship to Africa, understanding that sense of where I belonged. I say me, but we. There was also the conversation between Africans and African Americans. These were all things that was always bubbling around in my head. And I wanted it to be provocative. I wanted it to be something that an audience couldn't just come in as like a piece of entertainment. It would be something that they would consume and then have to have a conversation and then have to be challenged by. And the further I got into the challenges, the more it became a horror. The further I got into the personal aspect, the relationships between Caleb and his sister, the death in the family, which the more I got onto those really uncomfortable topics of grief and infidelity and anger and pain, the deeper I got, the more it became a horror. And the more I indulged myself with going to the extreme, the more it became a horror. And it was odd because I was in the production process and there was a moment where I remember listening to Ben Milcher, the sound designer, and talking to Randy Torres, who was the sound designer. It went too far. It went to a point where I was like, oh my God, I'm putting something out into the world that is so violent, that is so dark, that is so deep. that it's making me feel that thing. It's making me afraid of myself in a weird way. And I guess that's where I realized it was working. But at the same time, I realized that's what horror is. And so that was the first time I really realized, oh, I guess this is a horror. This is a horror. And so started to lean more into that and accept it for what it was. But I was a big fan of all of Jordan Peele stuff, Get Out, Us. There's a great film, Monos, that I really love, this Chilean film about this group of kids that are in a jungle and they end up capturing this journalist, and it's this really intense, dark, Lord of the Flies tense drama. Those were the main influences behind it. And it was more thriller and psychological thriller and trying to get to the depths of that. And then, of course, you bring in the monster aspect of it, which then was another genre. I love the idea of starting off with one genre and morphing into something else. I wanted to start off with a family drama that morphed into something terrible and horrifying and cinematic and fun as well. So wanted to get the both the same world. So I didn't really set out to do a horror per se.
Nyasha, you've previously said before, you going through a tough period in your life where audiobooks helped you through it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering how much of those books about maybe fear were the primary driver in you creating Sacrilege.
I think a large part of that, there is a fear of a lot of things. One book that really comes to mind is The Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. That was, classic. Absolute classic. And that created a profound shift in me. And there's an audio version that Joe Morton reads on Audible, which is phenomenal. And I remember just getting lost in that at one time. It was like starting out as a young actor in New York. My career had been in some way hijacked a little bit by an incident that happened when I was basically forced to return to New York. I wanted to start my career in the UK, but I was an American citizen. And due to some immigration complication, I was forced to go back to New York. So I ended up in Bed-Stuy, in this dingy apartment in Bed-Stuy, and was trying to pull the pieces together again and trying to start again from scratch. I was like, I just finished drum school. I was like, I'm going to have this great career. Then I suddenly find myself in the middle of Bed-Stuy and had to build it back together. Thanks to Woody King, actually, that he gave me a bit of a lifeline. That was how I got into the Woody King Theatre, started doing a lot of August Wilson, started getting into the conversation about African Americanism and coming back to that, wanting to really understand that part of myself, that identity. But in Bed-Stuy, in that dingy apartment, I read Invisible Man, and it brought a lot of sort of existential fear up within me, the sort of, who am I? But it also expressed a lot of anger that I was really hungry for and really found an affinity with. And it was the experience of listening to that alone at a time when I was most alone and having that intimate relationship with that author and that piece. It really kind of, it made a big difference for me. It really helped me through the pain. It really helped me process the rest of the world in a way. But it started well before that. When I was a kid, my dad would read to me all the time. He was a storyteller. My dad was a frustrated actor. In fact, somebody sent me a photo of him in a toga once when he was like 12. This was like 2 years ago. And this was like, and so his entire life, I'd never seen this. And he passed away in 2012. But we never had this conversation. And I got this photo and I realized that he was a storyteller. It was something that was intrinsic to him. And he used it as a way to make a safe place for us.
You talked about the horror, the violence of what came out of you for Sacrilege. And I was telling Mike, hey, Mike, listen, I don't know about you, man, but I'm going to have to put my headphones down here because this shit just got real. This dude is not fucking around, dude. But he's putting it all out in here. This is the type of stuff I don't even see in TV shows. This is the type of reality, man, that I don't see in movies. It felt too real.
When you say too real, you mean like too real, as in I'm feeling what these people are feeling. And I was going, that's what great storytelling is supposed to do. That's what great art is supposed to do. It's supposed to change me.
it's supposed to take me out of my status quo, out of my four walls that I live in my head. And Sacrilege did that. Where did you unearth this level of realness, the extremism in these characters, the fuck family from Caleb? When he says that so intensely, and I love my family, but I have felt it as well.
Yeah. It's just telling the truth. I think we often don't tell the truth. And I think we allow that lie, the cognitive dissonance, to exist in a way in order to keep things safe, to keep things together. But a lot of the time, that repression ends up creating these very violent emotions that we learn to deal with. And what if we just told the truth? What if we didn't hide those things? What if we showed things as they are rather than as we wanted them to be? You know what I mean? And I grew up in a very dysfunctional family. We had a lot of problems. I love my family as well, deeply. But we've had a lot of problems. And I think a lot of the problems, and one of the things I miss and have always wanted, was the opportunity to tell the truth. Is to really just be honest about things, because I feel in that honesty, there's a release. And in that honesty, there's power. And that honesty is how we see how to be, and we see the other person. That honesty is about coming together. You know, it's that feeling as if you're just sitting in therapy or something, and you have a moment where you tell the truth and you physically feel it. You know what I mean? That physical feeling where you walk out and you feel lighter, and the world seems, light is brighter. And that's a powerful thing. And that's what I wanted to delve into. That's what I wanted to give an audience. And it came from my own desire, this kind of repressed desire to have that my entire life. I've always wanted that. That's what I want. That's why I became an actor. I think that's why I became a writer. The work I do is really about finding that truth and affording the audience the catharsis that experience can give. Because that's the purpose. That's the purpose of art in my mind.
I don't know if you've done a search. If you do a search for the word Mbirwi, now that you've released this, you're going to get 5 pages of your audio drama before you get to anything about the history of what Mbirwi is. Because after I scrolled through 5 pages of your piece, it said that the Mbirwi was a restless spirit of a wronged sorcerer, bound to the mortal planes by chains forged from betrayal and thirst for vengeance. And so there are lots of stories from African culture that you could have told. And we mentioned it a little bit in our review. There are 2 kinds of horror. There's spiritual horror. Then there's human beings doing awful things kind of horror, which I think brown and black folks can relate to more. So what made you pick this particular spirit? What was your history with it?
So the Mbirwi is actually a collation of different, I changed the name a little bit. There's a spirit called the Mbirwi, which is actually very similar to the Mbirwi, an evil spirit that wreaks revenge. And so there's that element. I wanted to change.
Yeah, by the way, Google kept trying to correct me to make it spell that way.
I know, because I went through research on all these different African anthologies, and actually the original idea was to tell a series of stories told in folklores that sort of were modernized in a way. So I wanted to I was trying to, in different cultures, but I wanted to find a range of different spirits that spoke to this story in particular and adapt them in a way. I initially started with the Tokolosh, which is one of my favorite ones. And the inspiration for telling for the monster effectively was the idea of the Tokolosh, which if you're in Africa, they still talk about the Tokolosh. It's almost like part of the mainstream. It's like you'll get reports about what the Tokolosh did the other day, or strange sighting. And it's like, it's
like
all
Loch Ness Monster or something, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it's still very real in people's minds. It's still a little bit tongue in cheek, but people still indulge that sensibility, that kind of the mythicness as being real in some way. So there was the Tokolosh, and then there were stories that were told of another spirit. It was the nameless spirit that I came across when I was a kid, going through the Eastern Highlands. It's the Eastern Highlands part of Zimbabwe. It's a place called Nyanga, which is a very mystical place. And I was talking about this with my cousins, because my two cousins who are Zimbabwean but lived in Canada, and when they came back to Zim once for a holiday, we all went on this little trek. And we were with one of the locals who was taking us around this place and was telling us these stories. And he told us the story of this group of foreigners, these two foreign kids who had come to Nyanga and were walking around through this forest, and they were being insulting, and they were throwing things around, and they were messing around, and they had been warned. They said, this is a very holy area. You must pay respects. And this is a real story, real. Who knows? I never went into the research, and I'm loath to get into the specifics of this because these children disappeared. And that was always something that resonated with us, particularly because we were there at the time. And so like, oh, okay, let's keep it together. Yeah, let's pay our respects. But that story, the story of the Tokolosh, the stories of the Mbirwi, the legends of the Mbirwi, I wanted to collate something that sort of all came together and became its own myth, became its own thing that was specific to this story. And then add the aspect of the things we fear the most within, that becoming something that became a part of characteristic of this monster, the ability to hone in on those things that we fear the most, to hone in on those parts of us that are the most vulnerable, that cause the greatest pain, those things that we are most fearful of. And I wanted to bring all of that, and then also the notion of colonialism, of the idea of creating something so violent that it would be able to repel the invaders, so to speak. But that violence is something that is not in the nature of the people themselves. And so by indulging it is something that becomes destructive, not only to their enemies, but to themselves. And so the idea of collating all of these different characteristics and all these different stories and all these different legends and giving it the name Mbirwi, which I wanted Mbirwi because that sounds more Shona than anything else. It's just and also the plosiveness and the way it hits. It just really just felt like initially the show was called Mbirwi, but people were like, oh, nobody's really gonna know how to say it. It's gonna get a little bit thing. But that punch in that word, the power of that monster was a collation of all those different laws and feelings and sort of philosophies. And yeah, I wanted it to be the most terrifying thing it could be. And so it had to be a collation of a load of things to be able to achieve that.
I wanted to talk to you about your relationship with your cultural duality. You're like me. It's a duality thing. It's a cultural duality. You're from Zimbabwe and America, so you are the bridge between both cultures. I'm Colombian American. My parents are from Colombia, but I was born in America. And so every time I go to Colombia, they don't accept me necessarily as a Colombian. But here, I'm not necessarily seen as a typical American either. I wanted to talk about how do you identify personally and how do you identify publicly? And what was ultimately the message that you wanted to deliver with cultural duality and American privilege in Sacrilege?
Well, those are some deep questions, man. Existential questions like dual consciousness, Ellison, Invisible Man. It's all about. It's so weird because I was thinking about that the other day. Like, why do we have to have these conversations? Why do we have to figure this out so much? You know what I mean? What is the context that we live in where we're sort of obliged to really find out, like, who am I? Do you know what I mean? Can it not just be that I am? Do you know what I mean? I am, and that's enough. But as far as like how I identify, I think because I've grown up, first of all, born in DC and then grew up in Zimbabwe and then was educated in the UK, I've always been on the outside, as it were. So I've never really been able to sort of identify as any one of those things. The feeling of belonging that one would expect to have in any one of those situations has never been as full, perhaps, as I would want it to be, or at least how I would want it to be. But at the same time, I still find a deep affinity with all of those different cultures as a result, which I don't think I would be able to have if I felt solely part of the one. So I don't, As far as how I identify publicly, again, I am who I am. There's like this notion of wanting to sort of code switch, which I do when I'm sitting with a group of Zimbabweans, or African Americans. Actually, it's very similar. When you're just sitting and you're just shooting the shit, and then you're gassing out, and it's like there's something there that is, which I think is about communication. Actually, it's just this vernacular that one adopts to be able to communicate within that specific circumstance. And so I identified as the person I am in that specific circumstance, as the person that wants to communicate most truthfully with whomever I'm speaking to in that particular circumstance. Of course, there's going to be a lot of projections on me as to who I am or who I should be in some way or form, which I can't control. But as far as how I identify, it's just the person that I am in that moment. That's what I try and do. Obviously, there's times where, I want to look a bit more cool or seem more intelligent or whatever it might be and project a certain image of myself. And then that sense of self shifts to whatever that dream might be or that ideal might be. And so I guess the thing is that it's always constantly in flux and it's never concrete. But I definitely stopped wanting to appease other people's idea of who I should be. And there's a truth in that I want to become more closer to and really adapt and allow to be a part of myself, because I go off it a lot. It's not always the case, but particularly it's the interesting thing about the show is that when the show is like who I am. The show is all the aspects of who I am, and they're all valid, and they're all valid to different people in different situations, different circumstances, but it's still who I am, so to speak. So I don't know. It's an interesting question when you talk about that.
I was going to ask you, as a Zimbabwe American, how do you define Black identity today?
How do I define Black identity today? I can't. I think one of the things about this show is that it's complicated. It's more complex than we are comfortable with understanding or accepting. And that's a problem. I think it's undefinable. It's as undefinable as anything else or any other identity or any other. There's so many different versions of it that we have no idea of, that we have never experienced, that exist and are valid. So the idea of being able to, or presuming that I can define it in any one way, is presumptuous to a degree. I think there's the beauty in that it's much more than we could ever possibly conceive. And when we try to reduce it to anything specific, there's a fundamentalism that comes into place where it should be this or it needs to be this for whatever reason. And often that's because of circumstances where you need that sense of solidarity, or you need a sense of power under one identity to be able to survive ultimately. And I get that. But there's also strength in recognizing that it is so complicated and diverse, and there's a power in that it cannot be defined. And I want people that feel like they don't belong to be able I want Black people who feel that they don't belong or feel that they aren't part of the mainstream or don't fit in any way, to feel like actually they do fit in, and there is a place for them, and there is a place for us all. And I want us to come together in that respect, and allow us, that understanding would enable us to come together in a way which will give us the same sort of power and solidarity, but in a different way, so to speak.
Considering this has been the culmination of all the things that you know how to do, and you're still, I see you've got co-directing a documentary coming up, so you're branching off into something else. The question is, in the journey of making this, what did you learn about yourself in the process of making Sacrilege, Curse of the Mbirwi?
I love that it was okay to be myself. I think that was one of the main things I learned. There is a certain validation of a story of you putting something else that is so personal. It can go into the depths of just how personal it is, but there are a lot of deeply personal elements of myself that are in the show. And to know that those resonate taught me the fact that every bit of that is okay. And that the truth of that pain and those traumas and those things are not something to be afraid of, but something to be embraced. And I guess that was probably the most profound thing I learned about myself, is that all those things are okay. I also learned the power of a collaboration. And I don't want to toot my own. I will toot my own horn. I will.
Go, man. You earned it, my brother.
Stop it. But one thing I really enjoyed, first of all, working with actors. I love actors. I love collaborating. I love the notion of collaboration, which is something that I think I have a talent for, is to enable other people to express themselves in a way that is personal. This show is not just me. This show is like a collation of the expression of so many people, all of the cast. Well, I spent time talking to every cast member, talking to them about the show, about their lives, about how the show was reflected, or elements of the show reflected parts of them. There was such, I really wanted people to be able to express themselves through this piece. And I learned that I have an affinity for doing that. And I also learned that when you do that, that's when you can create something really special, because from the editor to the sound designer to the musician, Darren, the composer, the music, wow, we had some great times composing that music. To the producers, to everybody, QCode at Audible, even the execs, I can't tell you how many people at Audible or QCode have come up and been like, thank you for saying this or bringing this. And so I was like, oh,
wow.
Okay, I think that's something I can do, and that's something I should look at and maybe start doing a little bit more of. And so I think that's one of the things I learned about myself, is that I have a capacity to bring people together and to allow them a space to express themselves and through stories. And that's something that I really want to continue doing.
So you realize that you're Nyasha goddamn Hatendi.
You let him know, man.
Right?
That's right. Don't you forget it.
Don't you forget it. Who am I?
Who am I?
Natasha damn Hatendi.
Hold on a second. That's my sister. My sister. She would love that moment too.
Yes.
Even after it happened, we still found those moments, you know? When we were happy, when we were family. The family we could have been. But it was always fleeting.
Hey, Nyasha, you talked about this great cast, the vocal performances, and how you got the best out of them. Let's talk about Caleb McLaughlin for a second, man. Caleb has never done an audio drama at this level, as I know. He's been in film, TVs, but he's never done this. Mm-hmm. How did you get him to star in this? What was the process like? How did you know he was the guy? How did you know he was Deshaun? Because when you're in your head creating the character, are you already thinking about Caleb?
First of all, Caleb is just a great actor. He's a unique talent and has been since day one, since before Stranger Things. He has this very truthful quality, this irreverently truthful quality that cannot be taught. It's just intrinsic to who he is. We went through, as far as the development is, we went through a whole bunch of it. You got to get this person to get it made, or you got to have this person. And I was usually focusing on like the Bill and Anita characters, the two adults in the story. But it was always clear that Deshaun was the main character. So really to start forming the piece around that main character started to become the idea. And Caleb was the first name that came up. And it just made sense. First of all, I don't know whether he's one of the biggest movie stars in the world after Stranger Things, but in his generation, I think he is in that level. He is probably one of the best known young Black stars of our generation. And he's going to be, God willing, one of the most important Black artists in our industry for a time to come. he stood on a stage in Comic-Con, and I'd seen this before his name was even brought up in the conversation. I remember him sitting on a couch at Comic-Con talking about how the fans of Stranger Things, and this is like a really young dude, he must have been like, I don't know, 16 at the time, maybe even younger. There's this isolated guy just alone on a stage, on a couch, talking about how his fans treated him differently because he was black, and being open about it, and being mature about it, and being like, all I want to do is give love. If people are like, that's not my problem. That's not what I'm out here to do. What I'm out here to do is give love. And I was just like, this dude, this guy at that age, there's something about that which I found deeply moving and deeply impressive. So when his name came up, it was just, I was like, yeah, there's, of course, that Caleb is the guy. And we had a chat. We talked for about an hour. He had read the script. Caleb is not afraid of going to the dark place as well. He's a brave actor. He goes to the edges and is willing to do that. And he was just like, I love what you're talking about. I love the idea of identity. It's something that I wanted to experience. We talked about family. There was a meeting of the minds, basically, which became a no-brainer. It was like, this is going to happen. Let's just do it. Okay. And then when we got into the studio, of course, because he had never done this before, luckily I had. So I was aware that it was going to take a bit of adjustment. There was going to be some transitions. And the first couple hours were a little touchy. It took a bit of time for him to warm up into it. And we got through each day. We did multiple takes throughout the day and pushed different aspects of it. And the one good thing was that he was in studio for the first recording. One of the things that I really wanted to make sure that happened was that the actors were together in the studio, like the old radio drama sort of way, so that they could see each other, they could react against each other. There was a sort of an immediacy. And so the great thing is that for part of it, he was able to be in studio for that first recording. And I think that really, what it exposed him to the other actors. So and the other great actors, Christina Elmore and Kevin Carroll, two fantastic, phenomenal actors. And there were times you'd come away and you were like, I think we've done everything that we can do, but there's always this question mark. You're like, throughout the whole thing, you're like, is this going to work? Is this going to cut together? Is this going to, fingers crossed? And then you go to the edit. And I remember sitting in the edit with Will Tendy, the editor, and hearing Caleb for the first time and just leaning in. There was something so filmic about his performance, so effortlessly filmic, that there was so much detail in so little that I hadn't really noticed as much while I was directing it. I was pushing for different aspects of it and wanting to hear them. But the minutiae of it, when we got into that editing room, I was like, wow, this is an incredible performance. You've absorbed everything and you've been able to express it in a truthful way, in a way that isn't indicated. It isn't sentimental. I think that one of the one word that we were all like, guys, this is not sentimentality. Be damned. We're not going to tell the audience what to feel. We're going to let them feel it. And Caleb, he just got it, man. He's got it. It's just, I don't know, that alchemy is just, it's just a great actor connecting with the material and just expressing something deep and personal and truthful, I think. And not many actors can do that. And Caleb did it with panache.
That night was when I started dreaming. Dreams so vivid, they seemed more than real. The kind of dreams that seemed to want to tell me the truth about myself. They were terrifying.
Nyasha, I wanted to close this by asking you the following. Sacrilege is really all about coming together. And one of the things that we here at Brown and Black are all about is about coming together. It's about unity, because there is so much division that we do need unity. As someone who is so good at collaborating with other people, how do we come together today in 2025 as Brown and Black people, or as just people, period? How do we do it through storytelling?
Telling the truth. I think that's it always comes down to telling the truth. We live in an age of lies at the moment. Never more so have we been in an age of lies. And we all know it. There's a moral injury that we're all going through every day because we know that it's not true. A lot of the truths that we know exist is being denied. So, I don't know, like having conversations like this, talking about things that we love, sharing the things that we love with the people we love, reaching out to the person we don't know at a moment when they're not expecting it, patting them on the hand, letting them know that they're seen. When I live in LA, this is a really fraught time for people. Just telling people that you care, just making it known that you care, that's coming together. Just expressing your willingness to see and be seen is the way to come together. And in the storytelling, I think, because I want to say cut the bullshit. Stop telling an audience what to feel. Let them feel it. Bring them in and let them feel it. And they'll give back because that's what they want. We want to be able to feel real feelings. We do want to be entertained, but we want to feel real feelings. That's why some of the great films, I love Moonlight, for example. I remember driving back from Moonlight, bursting into tears because it was just love. It was love. So I think coming together means being unafraid to love one another and to express that love and to do it in a way that's genuine and honest and without any agenda. I think trying to live in that space and trying to see people through that light, through that lens, treating people with that respect, that will bring us together. And I think if any storytelling involves those qualities, I think people will feel it. It will resonate.
Nyasha Hatendi, thank you for being on the Brown and Black podcast. You can catch Sacrilege, Curse of the Mbirwi out on Audible now. And that's it for this episode of Brown and Black. If you would like to support this podcast, please subscribe and leave a review. Your help will allow us to be heard by many more people. You can follow our comments and opinions on @BrownBlackPodcast on Instagram, Threads, and YouTube. We'll see you on the next episode
of Brown and Black.